What human being has killed the most people without knowing it? Not safe for work. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Whoever discovered asbestos and its great heat-resistant qualities. It was used in everything from plasters, electric wire insulation, flooring, gaskets, pipes, automotive parts. It still is legal for use in 140 countries around the world, including the United States. The Chinese guy that discovered how to make gunpowder. Whoever decided lead was a nice pliable metal to use. Ancient cities just didn't know better, and whatever pipework they had used lead, and they would store wine in lead, use lead plates, drinking cups, etc. It went on for a very long time. The constant exposure really did some damage, and no one really knew why for many thousands of years. The dude who invented leaded petrol also invented the chemicals that made the hole in the ozone layer. First person in Europe who died from bubonic plague. Whoever was in charge of the entrance exam at the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna in 1908. The priest that saved Adolf Hitler from drowning. The chauffeur that was driving Franz Ferdinand because he took a wrong turn. He ended up at the place the assassin was, and Franz Ferdinand was killed. This led to World War I, which then led to World War II. Whoever realized that if you left grains and water out, it became alcohol. The first guy to ever make a pointy rock. That dude who drank his old grape juice and said, "Dude, this fucks hard," and told all his friends. That dumbass fish that decided to grow legs and walk like 400 million years ago. Mao Zedong's war on birds, which led to an increase in insects that ate the crops, leading to famine in China and starvation of around 50 million people, more than Hitler killed in all of World War II. In 1347, a ship docked in the port of Sicily, and upon arrival the harbor master found all the crew to be either dead or gravely ill. Realizing there was something wrong, the harbor master locked down the dock. However, in the night, a group of thieves snuck in and raided the ship. They would go on to contract the Black Plague, which went on to kill 25 million people in Europe alone, a third of the continent's population. Andrew Wakefield, maybe. He's the one who started the rumor that vaccines cause autism. Fritz Haber. He invented the nitrogen process that global food production used for approximately 50% of our food. Without him, global population wouldn't have grown at the pace or density it has. He was a genius, and his contributions have been so profound, it's hard to know what things would have been like without them. I contribute deaths to him, and only because there are far more people that live and die because of him. Thomas Midgley Jr., May 18, 1889 to November 2, 1944, an American chemist, developed the tetraethyl lead (TEL) additive for gasoline and chlorofluorocarbons (CFCs, and held over 100 patents. While lauded for his discoveries during his time, today his legacy is seen as far more mixed, considering serious negative environmental impacts on these innovations. One historian remarked that Midgley had more impact on the atmosphere than any other single organism in Earth's history. Dude created leaded gasoline and the gas for car AC, both of which have the cumulative environmental impact that will haunt the world for untold years. The poisoning of leaded gas fumes has had health effects on inner-city people for decades. I'd go for Ancel Keys. He was a nutritionist who determined, based on the 7-country study, that dietary fats were correlated with the prevalence of heart disease, an erroneous conclusion which informed almost all public health information. The thing is, the 7-country study was initially the 21-country study. He simply excluded the data which didn't fit his foregone and incorrect conclusions. As a consequence, public health information regarding nutrition has unanimously vilified dietary fats for decades, while large corporations, protected by lobbyists and government, ties poison the food supply with fructose, an inexorable hepatotoxin, leading to at least 8 chronic and highly prevalent pathologies responsible for draining 75% of the US's healthcare budget. How people are still convinced by the fat hypothesis, about 5 to 6 decades of people getting ubiquitously fatter, lazier, and sicker is beyond me. So, I attribute the 2.8 million deaths per year as a result of obesity to keys, as well as the increased risks of all-cause mortality, read death to income, affecting the 0.65 billion obese people on the planet. Scientific rigor, humility, and transparency are important. The Chinese state police officer who ordered Dr. Li Wenliang to stop trying to warn the Chinese people of Wuhan about COVID and to stop calling for Wuhan to be locked down before COVID reached an epidemic proportions. In their minds, they were telling a quack to stop scaring people and making the Chinese government look bad. The consequence of their actions have been felt around the world. Sadly, Dr. Li Wenliang's efforts to treat people suffering from COVID led to him dying from the disease. Columbus brought smallpox, which ended up killing an estimated 90% of all Native Americans. I don't think anyone else in history has a kill count that high, certainly not an unintentional one. Pope John Paul II, by saying people in Africa shouldn't be using condoms. Cue in the death of a lot of people due to AIDS. The dumbass who cuts across 4 lanes on the highway without a turn signal active. Henry Ford mass-produced a weapon that would kill multiple millions and permanently disable many multiple millions more. Probably the person who introduced radium to medicine. That's some terrible stuff. The person who failed to kill the first mosquito to carry malaria. I would say the government in Flint, Michigan, but indictments have begun, so they know. Pope Alexander VI in 1493. He signed a document dividing the undiscovered world between Spain and Portugal and gave the starting colonialism the Christian arguments of bringing the right belief to the newly discovered populations, that in our times, especially the Catholic faith and the Christian religion, be exalted and be everywhere increased and spread, that the health of souls be cared for, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. Maybe not the most yet, but Andrew Wakefield et al. And indirectly responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths over the last few years, and unless something drastic changes, many millions more to come over the next 20 to 30 years. Christopher Columbus, while he was probably aware of some of the carnage he wrought with his slave-taking, child-raping ways in the Caribbean, he would have had no way of knowing the diseases he brought to the New World would go on to wipe out 50 to 90% of the hundreds of millions of people who live there over the next century. Hundreds of millions. William Stevenson. He was a representative for the British Security Coordination and was tasked with creating a British intelligence network stretching throughout the Western Hemisphere during World War II. He became a close advisor to Roosevelt, eventually advising him on expanding the U.S.'s intelligence capabilities. This recommendation manifested itself as the OSS, which then later evolved into the CIA. If Stevenson didn't make that recommendation to Roosevelt, while it is likely it would have happened regardless, who knows how many thousands of people would not have been killed as a result of covert action operations in Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Korea, Guatemala, Afghanistan, etc. It was inevitable. Thomas Midgley Jr., 1889 to 1944. He was an American chemist who invented both leaded petrol gasoline and CFC's Freon. New scientists recently described him as a one-man environmental disaster, and he's the only person to feature twice in Time's 50 Worst Inventions. He contracted polio in 1940 and devised a complex series of pulleys to lift himself out of bed unattended. Perhaps inevitably given his penchant for negative side effects, this invention went wrong and killed him by strangulation. Walter Durrante, a journalist who knowingly covered up the Soviets' genocide of the Ukrainians in the 1930s. His work was the sole reason why the US granted diplomatic recognition to the USSR, which led to communism being validated on the world stage for decades, and dozens of genocides to spawn from that. Not really that related, but the guy, I refuse to call him a doctor, who decided to test if vaccines cause autism, and he tested on about 11 people. Normally for a test like that, they would maybe get at least over 10,000, I don't know, but way more than 11. And most of the patients already had autism, and he concluded that vaccines cause autism, which is incredibly bullshit. And I hope he knows about all the tiny children who died of easily treatable diseases that could be treated by vaccines, and I hope he dies in a cell in prison with loads of pictures of children's coffins around him. Jean Nicot. He was a French diplomat that popularized tobacco in Europe. It existed before him, but like Henry Ford didn't invent the auto, just made it more popular with his production methods, Jean Nicot made tobacco more popular in Europe in the 16th century. In fact, nicotine was named after the tobacco plant Nicotiana tabacum, which in turn was named after Jean Nicot.